He used my research, my nights, my connections. And when the award came, he said, "Some people just get lucky." Not a single thank you, not even a nod. I was his girlfriend, his sounding board, his unpaid partner. But when the cameras turned on, he acted like he'd built it all alone. I cried in the parking lot that night, alone, ashamed. And when I whispered, "I wish I could go back and build without him," I meant it. The next morning, I woke up, 5 years earlier. This time, I wouldn't be behind him. I'd be out front, and he wouldn't even make it into the photo. No, one saw the long nights I poured into Mason's pitch deck, or the way I stayed up on calls with his potential suppliers, smoothing over his nervous blunders. I wasn't on the cap table. I wasn't co-founder in name. But I was there, cross-legged on the rug with whiteboard markers, suggesting tweaks to his pricing model, rewriting his mission statement until it didn't sound like a dorm room rant. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. That belief made me ignore how often he brushed off my ideas publicly, then used them the next day. I told myself love was about sacrifice, and in the beginning, it felt noble. But somewhere, along the way, it started to feel like erasure. His name was the only one on the application for the startup accelerator. I handed it in for him anyway, smiling. "We'll both make it," I whispered, and convinced myself I meant it. Deep down, I had the sinking feeling I was building something I wouldn't get credit for. But I swallowed it, again, because when you love someone, you cheer. Even if your hands are the ones holding the mic and passing it to him. The startup accelerator sent a congratulatory email with confetti animations. Mason whooped so loud he scared the neighbor's cat off the porch. He kissed me like we'd won the lottery. "We got in, baby," he said, spinning me in the kitchen. I kissed him back, smiled like it was my dream too. But when I asked what he'd say in his first pitch, he shrugged and said he'd figure it out on the flight. That night, while he gamed with his headset on, I drafted his slides from scratch, using my old pitch template, filled in with the business model I'd suggested months earlier. I even adjusted the margins to help his slides look clean and sharp. When I handed him the final version, he glanced at it and said, "Damn, you're a wizard." Then he hit send without even reading half of it. No thank you. No credit. Just entitlement wrapped in confidence. Still, I cheered him on from the background. Still, I packed his bags the next morning with protein bars and index cards, wishing him luck, like it wasn't my own blood, sweat, and ideas walking into that conference hall. I watched the live stream on my phone, earbuds in, sitting cross-legged on the floor of our apartment. Mason walked across the stage in a button-down I'd ironed, holding the clicker I ordered with my own card. The audience leaned in. He cracked a joke I'd written on his speaker notes, and they laughed. He spoke about market disruption, customer acquisition, early validation. My words, my language, my strategy, echoing through a mic in his hand. Not once did he say we. Not once did he mention a team. And when a panelist asked about his support system, he smiled and said, "I've just always had a strong drive." I froze. I replayed it. I thought maybe I'd missed something. But no mention of me. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I sat there, earbuds still in, not even breathing. That was the first time I realized he didn't forget me. He just never thought I mattered enough to include. I curled up in bed that night as he celebrated with his new friends over drinks. I couldn't stop wondering, was I always meant to be invisible? Days later, a post went viral on LinkedIn. Mason grinning beside a seed fund certificate, shaking hands with a well-known investor. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Built this from scratch. More to come." Over 8,000 likes. Dozens of comments. "Inspiring story, man. Self-made legend." My stomach sank with each notification. I refreshed the post, just hoping, maybe, he'd drop a line in the comments. A quick, Couldn't have done it without my amazing girlfriend. But there was nothing. Not even a tag. And in every reshared post, people called him visionary, solo genius, one-man rocket ship. It was like I never existed. And when he came home that night, buzzed on success and champagne, I asked him how it felt. He leaned back, arms behind his head, and said, "Feels like all that drive finally paid off." I nodded, pretended to smile. But something cracked quietly inside me. I had loved him with both hands and no ego. He had taken everything I gave and decided the world didn't need to know where it came from. In the car the night of the awards gala, I stared out the passenger window as lights blurred past. Mason held his trophy in one hand, scrolling Instagram with the other, liking posts about himself. I hadn't said much since dinner, and he didn't ask why. I thought maybe he would thank me, off camera, in private. But he turned and said, "It's wild, right? I knew if I just kept pushing, this would happen." I forced a breath. "Yeah," I said, barely above a whisper. "Wild." I clenched my hands in my lap to keep from shaking. When we parked outside our apartment, I stayed seated even after he went inside. The weight of being erased from something I helped build pressed heavy on my chest. I cried there, silent tears in the dim dashboard glow. "I wish I could go back," I whispered. Go back and build it without him. Just once. I want to know what it feels like, to be the one in the spotlight. It wasn't a prayer, just pain turned into a plea, a breath I let out into the night. The next morning I opened my eyes and felt strange. The air smelled familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. My phone buzzed beside me, but the lock screen showed a date that made no sense. 5 years earlier. My heart pounded. I looked around. My old studio apartment. The chipped mug I broke in 2019 sat unbroken on the counter. A stack of Mason's pitch drafts sat untouched on the desk. I grabbed my phone, checked every app. Everything matched. I was back. Back to the beginning. Before the pitch. Before the accelerator. Before I handed over my ideas for free. I didn't know how or why. I didn't care. The universe had granted me the unlikeliest gift, a do-over. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned but alive. This time, I wouldn't waste it. I wouldn't build for someone else's dream. I'd build for mine. And Mason? He wouldn't even know I'd been here at all. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I made coffee. I stared at the calendar and circled the date of Mason's first pitch meeting in red. I remembered it well. I had edited that presentation until 3 a.m. before he flubbed his way through it, then took credit for thinking fast. This time, I left the drafts untouched. I didn't offer ideas or corrections. When Mason texted asking to come over and go over the deck together, I replied, "Swamped today. Good luck." Then I opened a blank document. My idea. My vision. The platform I once described in passing to him, which he never took seriously. I started mapping it out. Brand voice, back-end requirements, user journey. I reached out to Lena, a brilliant developer and friend I drifted from after spending so much time on Mason's business. I asked if she had time for a quiet side project. She wrote back instantly, "For you, always." I smiled. It began, quietly, just for me. The seed I'd never planted before, because I was too busy watering someone else's garden. Mason noticed quickly. He wasn't used to being ignored. He stopped by unannounced with coffees and half-baked brainstorms he wanted me to evaluate. I listened politely, nodded, but gave no real feedback. The truth was, his ideas had never been bad. They'd just been incomplete. I used to fill in the missing links, tighten the weak spots, polish the rough edges. Now, without my silent touch, his pitches stayed clunky, his timelines overambitious. One night, he slid his laptop toward me and said, "Just give it a quick look, like old times." I slid it back gently. "You've got this," I said. "You'll figure it out." He blinked, confused. I smiled. "I believe in you." The words felt hollow, but they were polite, safe. Meanwhile, I had beta testers exploring my platform. Lena and I fixed bugs at midnight over shared screens. I stayed, quiet, didn't post, didn't pitch publicly, but I knew, this time I wasn't falling behind, I was just getting started. He started spiraling in small ways. First, it was the late replies from mentors he used to rely on. Then, a cold shoulder from a seed investor who once gushed over his potential. Mason couldn't see the cracks, forming yet, but I could. He kept looking at me like I was a missing piece he'd misplaced. "Do you think my problem is messaging?" he asked one day. "Maybe it's the narrative." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "Could be," I said. "Or maybe people just need to see more traction." It was the most honest answer I could give without handing him a solution. In the meantime, I wrote personalized onboarding emails to every new user who signed up for my tool. The numbers were small, but loyal. They wrote back. They told me what mattered. And I listened. I hadn't posted a single photo, but my name was slowly traveling, one good experience at a time. It took 6 weeks before Mason noticed the shift. He showed up at my door, holding his phone with a scowl. "Did you know someone launched an app that's basically the thing I've been working on?" I played dumb. "Oh, what's it called?" He said the name. I'd chosen it carefully, something clean, evocative, memorable. I watched his expression as it clicked. "Wait, why does this look like your design style?" he asked, eyes narrowing. I shrugged, feigning curiosity. Maybe they hired someone with taste. He didn't laugh. He stared. "You didn't tell me you were working on something." I sipped my tea. "You didn't ask." That stunned him more than anything. In his world, I had always been the open book, the echo chamber, the silent co-pilot. Now I was quiet, focused, building something that wasn't his. I closed the door gently behind him and exhaled. My heartbeat thrummed in triumph. It had begun. Not just the business, but the rewiring of how I allowed myself to exist. I was no longer the woman who dimmed her light to let someone else shine. I had become the one holding the torch. And Mason? He had no idea just how far. I was willing to carry it. Behind closed doors, my platform was growing. A small community formed around it. Writers, coders, startup misfits like me, who'd been sidelined in someone else's narrative. Every new feature came from conversations, not assumptions, and every win was earned, not handed to someone who forgot who helped him climb. One night, I stayed up monitoring traffic and noticed a spike. A tech blogger had discovered us, praising the interface and tone. "It feels like this product was built by someone who's been burned before. Someone who got tired of being polite." I laughed. They had no idea how right they were. Lena and I high-fived over video call. "You've got something," she said. "This isn't just a tool. It's a shift." Meanwhile, Mason was rebranding for the 3rd time in 2 months. He kept chasing trends, hiring consultants to fix what he didn't understand was broken inside. What he lacked wasn't polish. It was purpose. And no amount of branding could cover the hollowness of an idea built on borrowed drive. I didn't feel sorry for him. I just kept building. Quietly, carefully, like a woman who knew what loss had cost her and what she wasn't willing to lose again. 3 months in, I got my first acquisition offer. The number wasn't astronomical, but it was respectful, and from a firm that had once told Mason his concept lacked clarity. I didn't say yes, but I printed the offer and folded it into a drawer, right beside the first rough sketch I ever made. the one Mason had laughed at and called too idealistic. That night, I walked through the city alone, taking in the skyline with new eyes. I had built something, not as a silent partner, not as someone's support act, as the architect, the lead, the name people whispered in meetings. When I returned home, Mason had left a message. "We should catch up. I miss our old work nights. I think I figured out what I was doing wrong." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to catch up on. He wanted the engine that once fueled him, but I'd rerouted the power. It now lit my world, not his. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt free. I felt right. I felt like the woman I could have been all along, had I just chosen myself sooner. Mason showed up at my launch party uninvited. He wore that same too-tight blazer and brought a bottle of mid-shelf champagne. The room buzzed with industry names, early adopters, journalists. I was mid-conversation when I saw him hovering by the snack table, eyes scanning the room. Our eyes met. He smiled nervously. "Hey," he said, like no betrayal had ever happened. I greeted him politely. He leaned in. "This is impressive," he said, gesturing at the banners, the demo screens, the investors chatting in clusters. "Didn't think you'd take it this far." I tilted my head. "No, I always did." The silence hung heavy. He looked around again, maybe hoping someone would recognize him, ask about his work. No one did. Not here. This was my space. My room. The first place where I wasn't Mason's girlfriend. I was just me. Founder, creator, force. He lingered, for a while, but I let him drift. I owed him nothing. Not even a moment longer than I was willing to give. By midnight, he was gone. And I was still standing, still shining, and still very much just getting started. A month later, Tech Bloom ran a headline that made my stomach flip, not with fear, but pride. How she built what he claimed, and did it better. The article didn't name Mason, but anyone who knew, the scene could read between the lines. They'd interviewed users, featured screenshots, even quoted a line from my first email campaign. "This space is for the ones who've been underestimated." The comments were filled with people sharing their own stories, women who'd given too much, partners who'd been sidelined, collaborators erased from their own creations. I cried that night, quietly, without shame. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was recognition. It was the universe saying, "I saw you. I see you now." I printed that article too, not out of vanity, but to remember. Remember the version of me who almost gave everything away, and the one who finally took it back. Mason texted the next day. Just a single line. "Proud of you." I stared at it, then deleted it. I didn't need his pride. I had built my own. Mason wasn't done trying. A week after the article, he requested a meeting. "Just coffee," he wrote, "to clear the air." Curiosity made me accept. We met at a cafe downtown, one I used to drag him to when he claimed he was too busy to chill. He looked tired, hair a little overgrown, circles under his eyes. "You've changed," he said, not unkindly. I stirred my drink. Or maybe I stopped hiding. He nodded slowly. I thought we were building something together. I met his gaze. "We were. I just didn't realize you thought you owned it." Silence again. He tried to smile, but it wobbled. I miss those nights we used to brainstorm. I didn't. I missed the parts of myself I'd lost in them. The pieces that had to beg for credit, for space, for belief. "I'm not angry. Anymore," I said. "But I'm not going backward either." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the truth was too heavy to lift. When we parted, he reached for a hug. I stepped back and extended a handshake instead. He laughed, embarrassed. I didn't. For the first time, I was being clear. For the first time, I didn't flinch when I walked away. The next few weeks passed like sunlight pouring in after a long storm. My product hit a milestone, 10,000 active users. We held a virtual town hall, and people called in from all over the country, sharing how the platform made them feel seen, safe, capable. One woman said, "I felt invisible at work until I used this to pitch my idea. It gave me confidence. Thank you." I teared up, off camera. Not because I craved the praise, but because I finally understood the power of being the architect, not the assistant. These people weren't just customers. They were witnesses. Proof that my story didn't end when someone took credit. It began when I took it back. Meanwhile, Mason posted a vague tweet. It's hard watching people twist the truth. Nobody engaged. The silence was louder than any clapback. I realized then that the world didn't need me to defend myself. My work spoke louder than any rebuttal. The more I grew, the more he shrank. Not because I was taking anything from him, but because the spotlight he borrowed was gone. I was building my own light source now, and it warmed everyone it touched. An email landed in my inbox with the subject, Speaker Invite, Women in Tech Founders Panel. I stared at it for a long time. The sender was the very accelerator that had once celebrated Mason as the solo genius of our generation. Now, they wanted me on stage. Your story is resonating, the note read. We'd be honored if you joined our founder panel. I accepted with a single sentence, looking forward to sharing the journey. And I was. Not to gloat, not to settle old scores, but to show others what survival and reinvention could look like. When I walked into the venue weeks later, I felt something shift in me. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was calm, centered, whole. My photo was on the digital banner above the stage, next to a headline, From the Shadows to the Spotlight, Her Rise Was Her Own. I stepped onto that stage knowing full well that I'd once cried in the parking lot, outside this very building. But now they handed me a microphone. Now they wanted my voice. And I was finally ready to let it ring clear. As I waited backstage, I heard my co-panelists chatting. Women I admired, some I'd followed for years. One turned to me and said, "You're the one who launched Haven, right? That app saved me during my burnout." I smiled, humbled. That's the hope. The moderator introduced us and led with our origin stories. When it was my turn, I didn't rehearse a pitch or spit-polish stats. I told the truth. I helped someone else build a dream that erased me. When I asked where I fit in, he said, "Some people just get lucky." That night, I wished I could do it over, alone. And somehow, I got that chance. So I built Haven. Not just as a product, but a promise that we don't need to disappear to make something powerful. The room fell quiet. Then applause erupted, not polite, but fierce. Women nodded. Some had tears. They knew. They'd been there too. That panel wasn't about tech. It was about reclamation. About finding your name again after someone wrote you out. And I stood there, not bitter, not broken, just blazing, fully present, fully earned, fully me. After the panel, a long line of attendees formed to meet us. Some held notepads, some held memories. One said, "You made me believe it's not too late to start again." Another hugged me and whispered, "I left a partner like that last month. You made me feel brave." I smiled through tears. The stories weren't mine, but I had helped create space for them. As the line thinned, I spotted him. Mason, standing near the back, hands in his pockets, eyes wide with something between awe and regret. He didn't approach, just watched. Maybe he finally saw what I'd always been capable of. Maybe he was waiting for an invitation that would never come. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I simply turned to the next person, giving them my full attention. Because that was the lesson. Don't look back at someone who never saw your worth until others did. By the end of the evening, he was gone, and I didn't even notice when. After the event, I returned home and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Not to fix anything, but to really look. For the first time in years, I saw someone whole. Someone unhidden, unshrinking. I remembered how often Mason used to say, "You're the quiet type, huh?" As if quiet meant small. But I'd never been small. I'd just been surrounded by someone who needed to dim me to feel bright. I wasn't bitter about it anymore. I didn't need to be. I had outgrown the stage he left me on. And now, I was writing a whole new act. That night, I updated my company's about page. I added the line, "Built by a woman who knows what it means to be invisible and refuses to stay that way." I didn't use his name. He didn't deserve one. My story wasn't a mirror of his failure. It was a monument to my resilience. I clicked publish and closed my laptop. A new press request already waited in my inbox. It wasn't overnight success. It was the slow, steady reclaiming of everything I'd once been told I didn't deserve. And this time, I wasn't asking permission to shine. The press feature came out 2 weeks later with a headline that made me pause. "The woman behind the idea, now leading the industry." The article was gracious, thorough, but what made my throat tighten was a single sentence buried in the third paragraph. After being overlooked early in her career, she chose to build a legacy on her own terms. That was it. No exposé. No drama. Just truth. Honest. Dignified. Clear. When I shared it, the comments were flooded with congratulations. Old classmates, past co-workers, even one of Mason's former mentors wrote, "I always knew you had it in you." I didn't reply to him. Some doors don't need reopening. I spent that day in a quiet sort of joy, not the fireworks kind, but the sunrise kind. The slow dawning that says, "You made it. You kept going, and now they see. But more than that, you see." And that's the part no one can take away. A week later, I got a message from Sarah, the friend I'd reconnected with early in my rebuild. "Want to co-host a founder mentorship retreat?" she asked. "Just women, just real talk, no buzzwords." I said yes immediately. The retreat was small, only 10 women, but it felt enormous. We laughed, cried, traded horror stories and breakthroughs. I told them about the moment Mason first dismissed me, and how for years I tried to earn his recognition like it was a trophy. "The most dangerous thing," I said, "is when we internalize someone's erasure of us as fact." Heads nodded. One whispered, "That's exactly what I've been doing." We weren't building companies there. We were building each other. And somewhere between sharing strategy tips and ugly crying over bad funding calls, I realized something that stuck. In my ribs like breath. I didn't go back in time to ruin him. I went back to reclaim myself. The universe didn't give me a do-over to punish. It gave me a chance to choose me, fully, for the first time. And I did. The day after the retreat, I opened an old journal I'd nearly thrown out before moving. Offices. Inside was a to-do list from years ago. Help Mason build pitch deck, send his app to Accelerator contact, edit his grant proposal. Every bullet had been for him. I turned the page and found the line I'd scribbled months later in anger. "When is it my turn?" I stared at that sentence, that ache, and realized my turn wasn't coming back then because I wasn't taking it. I was waiting for someone else to hand me a spotlight. But this time I'd lit my own. I tore out the old list and burned it in the sink. Then I made a new one. At the top, protect your voice. Build without begging. Share with those who see you. Below that, I wrote my next product idea, one that had been floating quietly in the back of my mind. The rebirth wasn't over. It was just evolving. And I'd finally stopped seeking permission to grow. Somewhere in all of this, Mason posted a blog titled, "What I Learned About Ego and Startups." I read it once, then never again. It was contrite, a little vague, and didn't mention me by name. That was fine. I wasn't a chapter in his redemption arc. Let him tell his own story. I was too busy writing mine. Still, something about it made me reflect. Not on him, but on the quiet fear I'd carried. That maybe I had needed him back then. That maybe without his early platform I wouldn't be here. But that wasn't true. I had been the platform. The insight, the glue. He just stood on it and waved. I'd always been capable. He'd just been loud. Now that I was both, capable and heard, there was no room left for doubt or regret. Just growth. The next quarter, our company expanded into 3 new markets. We hired 2 women who reminded me of younger versions of myself. Bright, eager, a little hesitant. One of them once asked during onboarding, "What made you start this?" I thought for a long moment and then said, "Being underestimated. It's the best fuel if you learn to use it right." They both nodded, and I could tell it meant something. I wasn't just running a company. I was building proof, living evidence that being erased doesn't mean disappearing forever. You can come back. And you can come back louder, wiser, more whole. Watching those women take lead on projects, pitch bold ideas, and cheer for each other without shrinking made me emotional. I had created a culture I never got to grow up in. I had become the leader I once needed. And nothing Mason ever built could compare to that. Mason reached out one final time. No pretense. Just a message. You were always the reason it worked. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I stared at it for a long time. The words were true, maybe. But they were late. And truth delayed can still hurt like a lie. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but out of closure. His chapter was finished. Mine was still being written, with better ink, better light, and better company. That night, I stepped out onto my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city hum below. It struck me then that all those late nights I spent helping him, I could have been building my own kingdom. But now, I had. I was home. Not just in a place, but in myself. And I wasn't going anywhere. 6 months later, we were nominated for a National Innovation Award, the kind Mason used to dream about. I remembered him once saying, "If I win something like that, I'll know I've made it." I smiled faintly. The version of me back then would have secretly wished he'd take me on stage, let me share in the light. But this version of me, she'd built the light herself. I didn't win the award, but I didn't need to. Just being nominated, being seen, respected, that was the victory. After the ceremony, I stood in the hallway of the convention center while strangers came up to shake my hand. "Your work inspired me," one woman said. "I followed your story," another added. One even told me her daughter was starting a business because of my podcast episode. That was when it hit me. I wasn't just building a company. I was rewriting the narrative for women who'd been silenced, doubted, discarded. The stage didn't matter. The legacy did. And this one didn't need a spotlight. It would glow on its own for years to come. Not long after, I got a package in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Mason's. Inside was a notebook, the one we used to brainstorm our app. I hadn't seen it in years. There were still coffee stains on the corners and scribbles in my old shorthand, labeled back-end strategy, user funnel, launch risk mitigation. My work, every page, every detail, was mine. On the last page, he'd written a single line. I know now. You were always the blueprint. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I closed the book, set it in a drawer, and locked it. Not to bury it, but to protect it. My past was no longer a wound. It was a scar. And scars are proof you survived what tried to erase you. I didn't need to show it off. But I'd never let anyone write over it again. 1 year to the day after I walked out of Mason's apartment with nothing but a laptop and my pride, I threw a private party. Not flashy, just the people who helped me breathe again. We gathered on a rooftop, string lights above, jazz humming below. My best friend Sarah raised her glass and toasted, to the girl who thought she was broken, but was really just buried. I couldn't speak for a moment, because she was right. I hadn't been destroyed, I'd been dormant, waiting for the moment I'd believe in my own brilliance again. And I finally did. As we clinked glasses, I looked around and realized something deeper. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. It means laughing in places you once cried, and standing tall where you once crawled. I had done that, and the people around me saw it too. I wasn't alone anymore. Later that night, a young woman approached me at the party. She'd interned with me once, years ago. I was scared to even speak in meetings back then, she said. But now, I run my own design firm. You showed me what it looks like to lead without apology. That moment meant more than any award, more than Mason's apology. It was full circle, and it didn't need drama to feel powerful. Just quiet truth. I pulled her into a hug and whispered, "You already had it in you. I just helped you see it." And in that second, I saw my old self in her eyes. Scared but hopeful, unsure but yearning. And I silently thanked the universe for letting me survive long enough to be someone's mirror instead of someone's warning. That was worth everything I lost. The next morning, I woke up to emails and messages of congratulations. Apparently, someone had shared a video clip from the party toast, and it had gone viral on a niche female founders forum. I watched the clip. Sarah's toast, my stunned laugh, the warm chorus of "Hear, hear," and then my face, lit with something I didn't recognize at first. Peace. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace. Mason had taken so much, yes, but he had not taken me. I had been the seed, the soil, the rain, and now the bloom. And every woman who commented, "This gave me hope," watered me further. I didn't need millions to feel rich. I didn't need headlines to feel seen. I just needed this. One moment of truth echoing far beyond where I started. When a journalist asked to do a deeper profile piece, I hesitated. "It's not a revenge story," I told her. "It's a rebirth." She nodded. "That's exactly why I want to tell it." The article was titled, "From Footnote to Founder, How She Rewrote the Ending." I didn't expect the outpouring. Women wrote me from every continent, sharing stories of being sidelined, silenced, stolen from, and more than that, they shared how they got back up. My inbox became a gallery of resilience. I spent hours each evening replying, thanking them, offering whatever words I could. It was sacred somehow. Like we were all parts of the same novel, different pages, same spine. And the spine was unbreakable. The piece ended with a quote I hadn't realized I said during the interview. They told me I was difficult, emotional, dramatic. But none of those things stopped me. In fact, they were the reason I kept going. When I read that line, I realized how far I'd come, not just from Mason, but from myself. From the self that tiptoed through meetings, the self that apologized before speaking, the self that gave everything and asked for crumbs. That self didn't vanish. She evolved. She fought for a voice, and when no one handed her a microphone, she built her own. I closed the article and felt something I hadn't felt in years: wholeness. Not because someone validated me, but because I no longer needed them to. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. I stood backstage, minutes from taking the stage as the keynote speaker for the very same accelerator program Mason once begged to be accepted into. The event director whispered, "You've got 5 minutes." And I nodded, calm. In the crowd sat hundreds of founders, dreamers, builders. I wasn't nervous. Not because I thought I'd impress them, but because this story wasn't about me being impressive. It was about being honest. When I walked out, the applause hit me like sunlight. I smiled and began. 5 years ago, I was the invisible partner, the woman behind the curtain. Today, I stand in front, not because I demanded a spotlight, but because I stopped hiding. Silence fell. No scrolling phones, no coughs, just quiet listening. And I kept going. Not about Mason, not directly, but about what it means to be erased and what it takes to write yourself back in. My closing line was simple. If they won't, make room for you in their story, build one so rich they regret not staying. The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was thunderous. Not for revenge. For rebirth. For every woman in the room who finally felt seen. Afterward, people lined up to meet me, shake my hand, ask follow-up questions. I was talking to a group of young founders when I felt a shift in the air. I turned. Mason. Standing at the back of the room, holding a coffee cup like it was a shield. He looked thinner, quieter. Not broken, just faded. When our eyes met, he didn't smile, just gave a small nod and slowly approached. "Can we talk?" he asked. I glanced at the others, then motioned for us to step outside. We stood in the hallway under a flickering light. "I read the article," he said. "I watched your speech." I waited. "I didn't realize what I did until after you left. I thought I made all of it happen. But you were it, the whole time." I said nothing. Let the silence work. Finally, he added, "I'm sorry. I really am." I gave a soft smile. "I believe you. But your apology doesn't fix anything." His face dropped. "It doesn't need to," I continued. "Because I fixed it myself." We stood there for a moment longer. Two people who had shared a past, but no longer shared a future. "You're doing great things," he said quietly. "You really built something." I nodded. "I did. Without shortcuts, without stealing, without stepping on anyone." He blinked hard. "I guess I didn't deserve to be in this version of your story." I shrugged. "That's not for me to decide anymore. The story wrote itself." He smiled sadly, like someone watching a bus drive away with everything they never appreciated. Then he walked off without asking for anything else. No second chance, no photo, just silence. I watched him disappear down the corridor and felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, no regret. Just stillness. The kind that only comes when your wounds are closed and your hands are clean. Later that night, back home, I sat by the window with a mug of tea. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who cried in parking lots, begged for credit, worked twice as hard for half the praise. I wanted to reach back in time and hug her. Tell her, "Hold on, it gets better, you get better." I picked up a notepad and started scribbling ideas, new ventures, new collaborations. Because this wasn't the end, this was a launch pad. My voice wasn't just reclaimed, it was amplified. I wasn't writing to prove anything anymore. I was writing because it was in me to build. And this time, I wasn't alone. I had a team, a community, a movement. I wasn't just part of someone else's dream. I was the architect of my own. A few days later, a tech magazine ran a cover story. The woman behind the idea, now leading the industry. I chuckled when I saw it. Not out of pride, but peace. Because even that headline didn't capture the full truth. It wasn't about being behind the idea anymore. I was the idea, the story, the beginning and the continuation. And Mason? He was a chapter. A necessary one, perhaps, but not the defining one. The real plot twist wasn't that I'd outgrown him. It was that I'd finally seen myself clearly. Not as someone's support, not as a shadow, but as the story's own light source. That realization, that quiet truth, was worth more than any funding round. One evening, I hosted a private dinner for women founders, all of whom had been quietly changing their industries. No press, no sponsors, just soul-level conversations. One woman raised a toast and said, "To the ones who were underestimated, thank you for proving the world wrong with grace." We all clinked glasses, but I couldn't stop smiling. Not because the world had changed, but because we were changing it. Brick by brick, story by story. Every one of us had once been told we were too loud, too emotional, too much. And yet, here we were, building legacies on top of what they tried to bury. I looked around and whispered to myself, "This is the real award. No statue, no plaque. Just sisterhood, steel-spined and soft-hearted." The final moment came quietly. I was reviewing an updated bio for an international summit. One of the editors had drafted a sentence that read, "She rose after being overlooked, and now mentors others to rise." I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I added one more sentence. "He erased me from his success story. Reborn. I made sure he wasn't in mine." I stared at it for a long time. Then I hit send. That was it. The last line. The final word. Not out of spite, but clarity. Because this time the spotlight wasn't stolen, it was earned. And I didn't have to share it with anyone who hadn't earned it too.